Okay, hello everyone. I have a very interesting ideas here. Uh, in this week's two parshios, actually. There's really a lot to go on. I think in the main, what we will focus on is attempting to define the idea of kedusha. Um, Obviously, it's one of those terms that many people throw around in a religious context, which is vague and has no meaning or definition whatsoever, and therefore uh, it really ruins the concept because you have no idea. People have no idea what they're even talking about. They say something is kadosh or you know holy, which is probably a pretty incorrect translation. Um, so let's start off. Ask a few questions over here. First question is not really a question, more of a shayla, is what is the aside of the connection between the two parshas, Zachar and Kedosh? Right, seems to be two very, very separate things. Now, even though it's true, it's true that they're not. I don't believe it's a stuma. Yeah, it's a psucha between them, but lamaisa, if Chazal or Mesakim for us to read them at the same time, then there's an inyan of kirva between the two that makes it appropriate for those two parshas to go together, and we want to understand perhaps what that is about. And then we go over here, and we have the main place where it speaks about this Indian. And it says, "Daber okodas bnei Israel, v'amarta aleihem kedoshim tiyu." Right, so you speak to the Eidah of Israel, and you say to them, "You guys should be kadosh." Why? Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. Because I, Hashem your God, am also am kadosh. Therefore, you should be kadosh as well. Okay. And we have Rashi Dava Kol Bnei Yisrael. Mulam Yishna Pashazu B'Haket Nesharoiv Gufei Torah Tluyim Ba. So Rashi says that actually in Parshas Kedoshim has the majority of the Gufei Torah. Gufei Torah means the body of the Torah, meaning it has many, many, many big, very, very basic and necessary commandments that make up the body of the entirety of the Torah, and therefore it was a special idea that the Ramakil brought together all the Jewish people to hear this. So Kedoshim Tiyu, so says Rashi, have a prushim min ha'arayos umin ha'aveira. So Rashi says that the definition of Kedoshim is to be parush, to be separated from arayos and aveira. Shekol makom sha'atamotze geder erva, says Rashi, every time you find a geder, a fence put up, meaning that the Torah puts up the fence, but lagabe erva, atamoitze kedusha, you find kedusha. Why? Because it says isha chazana v'chalala by a kohen, and a kohen is not allowed to marry a zayin or chalala. It says ani Hashem mekadeshchem. It says v'lo yichalal zaro ani Hashem mekadesho. Also by a kohen, kedoshim yiyu isha zana v'chalala. So Rashi is essentially proving and is teaching the Indian of kedusha as being parush from arayos and avera. Now we have a basic kasha on the Rashi. Lecha oira. Rashi, when Rashi says mina arayos and mina avera, when he says this word umin ha'avera, Rashi is referring to avera in general. Well, that's what he's saying, and it seems to be that Rashi, in the reading of Rashi, you can't really read it properly because let's learn this Rashi together. First, Rashi says what? He says, "Be parshed from arayos and avera." So it sounds like he's including avera, meaning the general concept of avera, meaning all averas, in kedoshim tiyu. And then he says, "Shekom malchus together erva," which is erva is arayos, so the same word, the same inyan. right? Atamai to kedusha. So Rashi is bringing proofs, and he's telling you that kedusha comes from being separated from, having a geder from erva, which means that you are not just not doing the erva, but you create a fence around it. In other words, this is a bit of a teeth, a deep understanding. But the concept of being parish from something, if I'm separated from something, doesn't mean I don't do it. That's not pshat. You can not be separated from something, but still do the thing. Being separated from something means that you create within yourself a reality that is structured within the definition of what you are, and then that structure prevents you from conceiving to do the Avera. Or another way to say it is, the structure that you create makes it that the new definition of who you are, part of it is that you can't do that Avera, because that would violate the idea of who you are. So in other words, we all have, and this is what they say about television, that unfortunately it ruins this idea. But we know that there's people have standards, and those standards are based in their levels of what they can conceive of, and based off the way they were raised. Certain people, they could not conceive of doing acts that are inappropriate or incorrect, because of the fact that they were simply raised, and their whole lives were they part of the definition of who they were was that they don't do those things. So, in as much as a regular human being, I mean, Bisman is unfortunately, even this is almost not true anymore. But simply speaking, a normal human being is not going to go ahead and murder somebody. It's not shot. Oh, I need a murder. I want to murder, and therefore now I'm being pirish from being from murdering. No, I just definition of who I am is that a normal human being doesn't go ahead and murder other human beings. It's not a challenge. So the aside of precious is this exactly. Precious means you create a definition of self, and once you're in that definition, the thing that you were being punished from is not even conceivable to be done, because it would violate the new way that you define yourself. And they talk about, this is how you do tshuva as well, but that's a different discussion. But L'chara Rashi is saying this. And then he says, together erva. So how can Rashi tell me that kedoshim to you means that you should be parish from arayos and avera referring to in general, and then he's bringing a raya, but his raya only talks about geder erva, and erva is only arayos. So how does Rashi therefore also say that it refers to avera as well? It only refers to arayos, because that's where he's bringing his raya from. And he says, shekom to geder erva. But I thought it was also avera in general. That's what he just said here. So if someone is analyzing this Rashi, there's a stira mamish minei ubei. It makes no sense. He's saying something l'chayra that you can't read as an intelligent human being. So this has to get. We need to understand what this means. Vayter, we know that the Ramban actually learns that that this Inyan, let's see the Ramban. The Ramban learns. He said the B'teres Kohanim Reisi Stam Prushim to you. Okay. So he says, "Lefidei ein aprisa is really freshman arayish divei arav, or aprisa was carries b'chol magim tamush b'leirkan prushim." And he basically says the famous concept that we all know, kadesh atzmecha b'mocholach, that a person can't be. There's a famous lashon he uses, a novel b'rshus hatera. A person can't be a disgusting human being within the parameters of the Torah. So the Ramban basically touches the pshat that the aside of the kedoshim is basically that a person shouldn't say, well, since the Torah doesn't forbid me to eat as much as I want, as long as it's kosher, so I'll just stuff my face all day and indulge and indulge and indulge. Same thing with, you know, uh, with the wife. You can technically, there's no shear, so the Torah doesn't have a shear for how much you can physically indulge. So technically, a person can say that he can be a glutton in the rishos of the Torah. And so Kedoshim to you says, no, don't do that. So, l'chayra, we don't want to say that if we don't have to, that Rashi is going against the Sifra, which the Ramban quotes. So that's another problem that we have to deal with. And really, it seems to me also that Rashi is that what Rashi is coming off over here is that seemingly the connecting piece between the two parshios is erva, right? Because we have over here in Acher Mos, we have you can't do all these ervas, and then at the end of Kedusha we also have erva, and it says Ki ani Hashem echad Yishem, and then it lists all the ervas. So when we understand the Inyan of Arayas, we would also understand what the connection is between the concept of Acharei Mos and Kedusha. So now let's go, and I think we're gonna try to give a Pashup shot over here. So we know, and we've quoted this quite a few times at this point, the Maharal says that the Shalosh Chamuros are connected to three different relationships that man has. So you have Gilei Arayas, Shvichas Dam, and Avodah Zarah, and those are Keneged. Gilei Arayas is Keneged Talmud Torah, and Talmud Torah is learning is in order to understand the relationship between Adam le'atzmo, and you have Shvichas Damim, which is Keneged ben Adam la'chaveroi, and that is Gemilas Chasadim, is the inverse of that one, which is correctly relating to your fellow man and doing chesed with him, for him. And then the last one is Avodah Zarah, which is connected, a man's relationship with God. And then the proper kiyum of that is in tefillah and avoda, etc. So we understand the following thing. We understand over here like this. Okay, so position 2. So have a prushim in arayis min. So what's Rashi saying with that? What Rashi is saying is like this: the aside of kedushim. Actually, no. Let's start another way. When we say that someone is over in avera, right? So we know that we have another word for sin in the Torah. We have many words for it actually, but each of them have a different connotation. But in general, the other generic word that we use for an avera is a chet. And a chet really just means that you miss. You make it. There's no word for sin in the Torah. It just means that you miss. But lo yachati in the Tanakh, by Binyamin, it says that they could shoot an arrow and they wouldn't miss a hair. It says lo yachati, they won't miss. So a chet means that you miss, which is based on the premise. This is already in all the Rishonim and even the Achronim, even very late Achronim, that it's based on the premise that basically a person wants to do the right thing, and when he does something wrong, he's making a mistake, and he's making a mistake. That's what chet refers to. Then there is avain and pesha, which is on purpose, etc. The question is, what does avera? When we say that something is an avera, what are we describing? What are we saying? And the answer is that the word avera comes from the lashon of oiver, which means to pass something. Right? Means he passed in front of them. Right? All Gemaras, all Bashas, you have to make a bracha oiver la'asiyas. Right? Before you do, when it says you pass. Right? So what does this mean? That chatayim, or even b'meizid, I guess, it's called avera. What is the inyan of that? And the answer to that question is that when someone does a chet, when they do a sin, they are impacting at least two senses of their relationships. The first one is to themselves, and the second one is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's no matter what. So what we have to understand that Avera, the aside of Avera is that I passed something. What does it mean I passed something? It means that the Avera is the reference of the negative impact that doing a chet has on the identity level of the individual. In other words, how it ruins the Bein Adam La'atzmo. How it describes how when a person does a Avera, the impact destroys the relationship between him and himself. And this is not, this is very, very tangible. People, unfortunately, the most, Bisman Hazeh, I think more than ever before, struggle very, very much with the basic feeling and understanding that they are confident and know who they are. Meaning that people struggle with understanding themselves. They have a issue with the relationship between Adam La'atzma. And one of the brilliant ramifications and goals and things that the Limud HaTorah does, and the Siyas HaMitzvahs does, is that it creates this consistency. Because we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Yistakeh Bel Reisa Ubari Alma, and that the Torah is essentially a description of existence. That's really all that it is. It's given to us in a format of mitzvos and learning so that we, as human beings, can do the things which establish the parameters of what it means to be an Adam. And this is very, very, very important. And it's actually in a pasuk in Achribais. It says over here, and I just want to prove to you the Adam part, because in the Nach it's mamish pasha, but in Torah I didn't find it until recently. It says over here, Ushmartem esklukosai bes mishpatai, and Rashi says this is referring to mishpat and chok, right? So it makes sense or doesn't make sense. It says asher yaseh osam. It doesn't say asher yaseh osam Yisrael, Yehudi, Jew, anything like that. No, it says ha'adam, that a person, a human being will do, v'chai b'hem ani Hashem. And that is based in the aside, which we've referenced to in the past, and we don't have time to get fully into what it means, but it's based on the aside that Klal Yisrael are meant to be the correct Adam. The initial Adam, the Adam Arishon that messed up, our job is to be misaking that, and therefore, in our act of doing Torah mitzvahs, we go back to the status of actually what it means to be a human being. That's really what a tzaddik and what someone who keeps the Torah mitzvahs, he actually is just going back to being what a proper human being is. Post sin, our definition of what a human being is shifted to Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. But really, a human being is someone who is engaged in a relationship with all three facets of in a way that is full and complete and real, and he's firing on all the possible cylinders of who he is and who he can relate to. That is a human being, and that's what the Torah ends up doing and ends up having us do. It forces us to have appropriate and good and fully engaged relationships with God, with our fellow man, and ourselves. And that's really the definition of Adam. And now we're referring to this aspect of Adam, how when you do an Aveira, you're being over. What line are you passing? What are you transgressing? What you're doing is you're transgressing the line of the structure of your identity, which the Torah gave you through Torah mitzvahs. And people don't understand this. This is a pleistic, a godless about what the Torah does for people, is that it gives them a structure within which to express themselves, and that structure is aliba de emes, in the most pure and real and true level, the actual way in which a human being is meant to express himself, and therefore a person will feel content and will feel the relationship between him and himself as being solid and connected when he is doing Torah mitzvahs. Because again, the Torah is just a description of what is. And therefore, when you fulfill the Torah and you learn it and you do the mitzvahs, you're just connecting back to what actually is. It's nothing else. And therefore, what we have over here is Rashi is telling us a pleistically aside, an amazing concept. We said that Arayas is the problem, and when you do Arayas, what happens is that when you do Arayas which is the extreme, you completely violate the relationship between you and yourself. Right? And this is actually a very, very interesting concept, that Arayas is not a issue of something wrong you did to someone else, because the consent, not consent, it's totally irrelevant. It has to do with the basic definition of who you are. A person has a relationship to him and himself. When he does arayos, when you do incest, etc., you violate the relationship between you and yourself. And that is a general megala to the encompassing inyan of the fact that all averos violate your relationship between you and yourself. It's just that arayos is the extreme aspect. And therefore, Rashi is completely justified. Rashi says, "Pusha min harayos umin ha'avera shekom together ervat kedusha." What's Rashi saying? I thought he meant only arayos, not regular avera. No, Rashi is telling you that avera is arayos is the extreme, and it shows you the negative ramification within the rest of the Torah's averas as well, because it's one of the ways that encompasses the entire Torah in terms of the Torah is trying to teach you how to relate to yourself. That is what Rashi is saying, and it's a brilliant yesod and understanding. Just the people should realize that when someone does an avera, when they do a chet or a sin, depending on what they do, they're violating realities on many different levels. If they're doing a ben adam chavero, then they're violating the relationship to themselves, to their friend, and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If they're doing it, if it's not ben adam chavero, it's just stam and avera, then they're violating themselves and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's it's very important to realize this, that this is this is really the aside, and therefore, once we understand that, we can now understand what the definition of kedusha is. The definition of kedusha is not some generic holiness, not anything like that. Kedoshim piyu means actively engage and be completely aligned with and expressive of the relationship between you and yourself. In other words, find your place, know your place, what it is, and engage in it completely. That is the idea of kedoshim, and it's brought out by the fact that we actually know that kedoshim doesn't mean holiness. There's no inherent positive holy aspect to it, because we know that the term for a prostitute is kedusha. That's in the psukim. Ayeh kedusha hi vaynayim. That's what Yehuda said to his friend, which means that what kedusha actually means is something which is separated and devoted to a specific goal or task or sense of self, which means that something for someone to be kadosh, it means that he is completely aligned with the relationship between him and himself, and therefore he is kadosh. And in doing that can only be done within the Torah and mitzvahs, because they're the only things who properly show you what you are, and therefore, when someone is Mekayim mitzvahs, he is considered to be a kadosh. And memela, if you're going to be kadosh, you'll be parish from arayos and avera. And we just, as we said in the beginning, pshat of parish does not mean that you're just not going to do them. It means that you will actively create a definition of self, or now that I'm saying it like this, probably it means that you will engage in the relationship between you and yourself, and you'll know yourself so well, and you'll create and you will have a sense of self which is so strong that you won't even fathom of doing something which would violate that sense of self. And that goes to arayos, and it also goes to any avera. So you can be parish from avera. And this is, it really gets into the Zahirus level of the Mesilas Yesharim, where he talks about this idea that a person has to realize, and this is a big yesod in general, when understanding, when wanting to grow, it's not, the way that things work is not, I'm just going to make a decision not to do things. That's not how people work. You can't say, okay, I did this Avera last year, or I did this Avera recently, now I want to not do it anymore, so I'm just going to make a decision, I'm not doing it anymore. That's a foolish thing to do, because you're not changing anything about the reality of what you are. You're just saying that you're going to exercise will to not do an Avera because you feel bad at this moment. But if you don't change anything about who you are, then there's no reason to think that you're going to get better next time either. So it's just a foolish thing to do. When someone wants to stop doing an Avera, he has to engage in Zahirus, which is carefulness at the first level of Mesilas Yesharim, which is that a person has a heightened level of awareness that will allow him to not put himself into situations or mindsets which will lead to him doing an avira. And that is the basic understanding of kedusha. In other words, you have a sense of self which gives you an awareness of of connection to who you are, and how that feels good and right and correct. And because you don't want to lose that, because you have that, that will give you the sense of awareness necessary to not put yourself in situations that you will end up coming to aver. And it's like they say, a person. It's a famous joke. A person never forgets to put on pants when he walks out his door in the morning. Why doesn't he forget? Because he understands that part of being who he is that he wears pants. People don't forget things and don't trip up on things and don't make mistakes about things that they attribute to being a part of the definition of who they are. They just don't. That's just not how people work. So if someone can successfully do this mitzvah of kedushin, what he has done is he has undergone the process of realizing that doing averas is not something he's going to work on not doing or something he won't do. It's not part of who he is, so he's not going to do it. Period. And it's not only true that that will lead you to set up gedarim of your own. What it will actually do is it will end up making it that you don't go into situations which you know are going to lead you to avera, because you understand this is just not what you're about anymore. And if you speak to people who went through this process of teshuvah, that's what they will tell you. It's not, oh, I stopped doing. I just don't go to that place anymore. I'm not in that context. I'm not speaking with that person. It's a question of zihirus. That's the aside of the kedusha. And Mela, now we can understand the connection of the achrimais with the death of Nadav and Avihu, and the avodah of Yom Kippurim, is that, like the Rambam says that Yom Kippurim, we know the main avodah is teshuvah, and the Rambam says that in Hilchos Teshuvah, that a person has to get to a point where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Rambam's lesson is Yoyed Alav Yodea Ta'lumos. The one who knows the hidden will be made on him, Shelo Yashav L'Chet Zel Olam, and he will not go back to this sin forever. I don't want to bring it up right now; it'll take too long. But all the Rishonim ask on him that the Rambam makes no sense, because the Rambam is basically trying to say that a person should get to a place in Yom Kippur, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu made, he'll never go back to this sin, but a person does go back to this sin. So how could it be that it will get to that point, and it would just be an Eid Sheker? So it just doesn't make sense. That's what they ask in the Rambam. And according to what we're explaining, the Rambam makes a lot of sense in what he's saying, and that is that when a person takes the time to establish and to realize and to meditate upon the fact, and this is all through Limud Torah, through seeing how it works, that the Torah is in fact meant and is the correct description of the basic idea of what a human being is, and therefore of what he is. When a person realizes that, he can do teshuvah and come to a point that at that point he will be someone who would never go back to doing the sin that he did. And if he does do that, it's much less likely that he will ever go back to that sin. And in fact, the Gemara says that a person doesn't do an Avera until a Ruach Shtus is nichnas. Until a Ruach Shtus goes into a person, he doesn't do an Avera. That's the Galasha and the Gemara. And that's for the exact reason that we're saying now. It's the aside that doing an Avera has within it an inherent level of stupidity or lack of mindfulness or awareness, because it's simply an act which is a violation of who you are. The only way a person can do an act which violates who he is if at the time that he's doing it, he is completely unaware of what he is, and therefore has no kedusha whatsoever, and therefore it's a ruach shtus. Good job.